So I'm talking about using brainspotting in therapy, which is an approach that I use with some neurodivergent clients or clients who come in with ADHD, complex trauma, more somatic issues that are more based in the body rather than simply cognitive issues. In brainspotting, it starts out looking very much like any other traditional talk therapy session. The client will come in and talk about what they'd like to work on that week. They'll bring an issue. Might be something that's happened that week, or maybe some deeper issue that they're trying to make sense of in therapy. So I'll ask the client, do they prefer a lighter pointer or a darker pointer? They might notice, oh yes, as I look towards my left-hand side, I'm feeling a kind of activation in my chest, or I feel some fluttering, or I'm starting to feel hot or cold, or feeling something weird in my feet, whatever it might be. Through a combination of my presence and understanding what's going on for the client, we'll find an eye spot that corresponds with the activation. I'm going to be talking in this video about working with clients who may be neurodivergent, who may identify as on the spectrum, who may have conditions such as ADHD. Really, we're talking about working with people, aren't we? Because we all have different personalities, different senses of identity, different patterns of behavior and feelings and ways that we may interact in the world, be in our relationships, be in different environments. And really, when we're talking about conditions or diagnoses, often we're just talking about patterns of those traits. So I'm talking about using brainspotting in therapy, which is an approach that I use with some neurodivergent clients or clients who come in with ADHD, complex trauma, more somatic issues that are more based in the body rather than simply cognitive issues. And these can be really helpful for certain clients. You may feel that you have an issue that you don't necessarily understand verbally. It may be that it feels like it goes deeper than that, although it's not necessarily something you feel you would benefit from just talking about. So really what we want to do in therapy is to work with the whole person. If you've ever been in the company of someone who seems really confident and really relaxed in themselves, who really is in their optimal state of flow, you often feel that that person is inhabiting their whole self, their whole body. They're really in touch with themselves, they're really attuned, they're really comfortable. And we want to be able to work with the whole person in therapy in the same way, to really access the whole of the brain, the whole of the body, all of the different states of the nervous system. And it can be difficult to do that sometimes if we restrict ourselves to talking or cognitive approaches, because that really accesses only just a part of the brain. The verbal part, the rational part, the cognitive neocortical processes that are going on as we try and translate our experience into representation using language. And in some ways, language is always going to be metaphor because we can never fully capture what our experiences are. Reality will always outpace our attempts to explain it. So what we want to do is to go beyond the verbal in therapy and to connect with the whole person. And brainspotting is a great way to do that. We start to have a neuro-experiential approach to therapy with brainspotting. We use the eyes, the positions of the eyes and eye movements in brainspotting as a gateway into the nervous system. I've spoken about this in previous videos, and the research and evidence is published online. What we do is we use the visual cortex and eye movements as a way to start to process different feelings, memories, sensations, and to have an attunement repair to connect back in to the body and into the nervous system. Very often, people with neurodivergence or ADHD or conditions like this have learned to tune out certain parts of themselves because they've been told that it was bad or it wasn't socially acceptable or it was inconvenient. And so there's a kind of a misattunement that's taken place with a lot of their full selves. And as we start to connect back into the body and nervous system with brainspotting, there's an attunement repair that takes place. What often happens with conditions like ADHD, or for clients who may be neurodivergent, we're all somewhere on that spectrum, is that there's what's called a dysfunctioning with sensory gating. And a simple example of sensory gating is what's called the cocktail party effect. So you think of when you're at a cocktail party and you're talking to the person in front of you and you're able to filter out all of the rest of the noise that's happening at the cocktail party, all the other crowds of people talking, the noise of glasses clinking, noise of the music in the background, the people coming back and forth, all of that gets filtered out through a process called sensory gating. And with people who are neurodivergent or ADHD, people with PTSD or complex traumas, we now know that their brains struggle with sensory gating or can go into a hyper-arousal around sensory activity and can start to feel quite disorganized. So what we want to help with is that sense of filtering and making sense of sensory information. There are different subtypes of ADHD, but all of them share that quality of often feeling quite dysregulated and overwhelmed. And Brainspotting is a really, really powerful way of starting to attune back into the nervous system and start to understand what's going on when we can struggle with that kind of sensory gating. And it may be that there is sensory signaling happening inside of the body. We would refer to that as interoceptive or neuroceptive signaling, the stuff that our body is telling us all of the time below our conscious verbal awareness, just noticing, how do I feel right now in my body? What am I feeling emotionally? Almost like checking in and taking our own temperature. So it could be that internal signaling, or it can be environmental stimulation, the people around us, the environment that we're in, noticing how that activates our nervous system. If we think about the enteric nervous system, which is based in the gut, that is always looking out for toxins. You know, that the function of that when we're in utero is to literally detect toxins to exclude them from the baby through the umbilical cord. But once we are out in the world, we still have that nervous system. It hasn't disappeared, and it's constantly detecting for toxins, not just literal physical toxins in what's coming into the body, but toxins in the environment, toxic relationships, toxic feelings, toxic sources of stress.
Harley Therapy, the UK's leading experts in therapy and mental health care, right here in London or online.
So we have multiple nervous systems. We have the enteric nervous system, we have the limbic system that goes through the body, and we also have what's called the polyvagal nerve, and there's been a lot of talk about this. This has become really popular in therapy over the past few years, understanding the polyvagal framework of working with people, understanding these different arousal states. When we go into sympathetic arousal, we fall into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, people pleasing, or we can drop down lower into dorsal vagal collapse, which is when we tend to withdraw and shut down. And we can kind of match those different states to moods often. When we're in dorsal vagal collapse, we can feel quite depressed and hopeless and numb. When we're in parasympathetic or sympathetic arousal, it's more of that fight or flight action mode, move mode. It can feel quite restless, quite manic, quite anxious. And what we want to do is to come out of those more primal survival or threat response states and to start to get a client back into their calm, regulated flow state. That's where the body can rest and digest and feel at ease. And it's also where we can be safe and social with other people. So we're not just regulating ourselves, but we're able to co-regulate, which is really the default. You know, humans are wired for co-regulation and to connect with others and to be in groups. So we want clients to always be comfortable in all states of their nervous system, and Brainspotting is great for that. I'll just explain briefly what happens in the average Brainspotting session, or there is no such thing as an average session because it'll go wherever it needs to go. But in Brainspotting, it starts out looking very much like any other traditional talk therapy session. The client will come in and talk about what they'd like to work on that week. They'll bring an issue. It might be something that's happened that week, or maybe some deeper issue that they're trying to make sense of in therapy. And that's what's called setting the frame in Brainspotting. We'll talk about what we're going to work on in that session. And we may do some front loading. You know, we'll start out by talking around the issue, understanding how it is impacting that client in their lives. And then when the client is ready, I will ask them to put on some bone conduction headphones like these. They just go around the back of the head and over the ears like that. So you can still hear me in the room, but you'll have gentle music playing. It may not even be music, it may be soundscapes. Some people prefer those, nature sounds, whatever works for the client. Just playing back and forth. So we have bilateral sounds that are playing into the bone conduction headphones, creating vibrations for both sides of the brain just so that we get the full brain more involved in the session. We want the whole client to be present in the session as we start to work with the issue. And as that's going, I'll also ask the client to start to check in with their body and with their nervous system and start to notice what's activated for them around the issue. And I will use the pointer to help with that, or we may just notice what are called gaze spots. So these are just where our gaze takes us, where our eyes rest as we're thinking about an issue. You know, often when you're telling a story, you might notice that as people are telling a story, their eyes will drift to a certain spot and they'll start to tell you about what happened to them that week. And they're going into that neural pathway of the memory. So sometimes it's organic like that in Brainspotting, and we might access those gaze spots. Other times I'll use a pointer. I'll ask the client, do they prefer a lighter pointer or a darker pointer? And we'll then start to find that spot together. They can either use what's called the inside window, which is their own sense of what's happening inside the body and in the nervous system. So they might notice, oh yes, as I look towards my left-hand side, I'm feeling a kind of activation in my chest, or I feel some fluttering, or I'm starting to feel hot or cold, or feeling something weird in my feet, whatever it might be. That's inside window. Or it might be outside window, that as I'm moving the pointer across their visual field, I might notice, oh, it seemed like you shifted a bit in your body there, or it seemed like your eyes were flickering, or did you notice you seemed to change the way that you were sitting in your seat, something like that. So through a combination of my presence and understanding what's going on for the client, we'll find an eye spot that corresponds with the activation, and we'll then simply process it. That's all that we want to do, is just to allow the brain and the nervous system to do whatever they need to do. And we'll see where that goes. So I will just hold the pointer on the spot and let the client process for as long as they need to. And I'm always in the tail of the comet. The client is the head of the comet, leading the way in the session, knowing exactly where they need to go. And they can talk as much as they want to. It doesn't mean that we don't talk. They can process however they need to. Some clients process verbally and will talk throughout the entire session, and I'll just hold the pointer there while they're processing. Or others are non-verbal processors, which is why sometimes Brainspotting can be great for neurodivergent people, people who don't process in the same way, who don't want to necessarily talk about an issue. They can sit and process and just notice what's happening on a much deeper level. So Brainspotting is really effective for bringing the whole person into the room as we work with an issue. And there are many different ways that we work with the pointer. We don't necessarily just hold it in place, but there's also what's called rolling Brainspotting, where we might move across several different eye spots. There is also what's called vergence work that we do, where we can come in closer and then move further back out. Notice what's happening there with our visual field and perception and how that feels. We're often making sense of proximity, and it may be that those relate to attachment issues or attachment traumas as we're working there. And we can also do what's called body spotting, where we might process something somatically in the body, and I'll just ask the client to gently touch the pointer to any place in the body where they feel activated, or it may be where they feel calmer. Sometimes in Brainspotting, the activation can be quite high, quite intense, in which case we will focus on resourcing work. That's where we help the client find somewhere that feels more regulated, more calm, more grounded, because people can sometimes start to feel overwhelmed when we're doing this kind of somatic work. Or we can even do expansion work, which is asking people to think about a vision for the future. You know, if we had resolved this issue for you, or if things were different and the way you wanted them to be, how would that feel? What would that look like? So, you know, if we think about vision as a metaphor, we're not just working with insight, but also working with foresight for the future, and also hindsight, making sense of what's happened and brought us here. And we use visual perception to get a real experiential sense of what's happening in the body and in the nervous system. So we're trying to build new neural pathways around these experiences and around these emotions. Often people will say that they just feel overwhelmed trying to explain what's going on for them in their lives. You know, you come into therapy, and where do you start? Often people feel that they're in a crisis, that there's so many different things that are reaching boiling point, and sometimes processing verbally can't even come close to capturing that. You know, how do we start to tell our stories? So processing verbally can be helpful sometimes, and there are many approaches that we use in therapy that will use talking and understand and link in what's going on cognitively to feelings and emotions and physiological stuff. But there's also many times where actually needing to process on a much deeper level and on a non-verbal level can be helpful. And that's where Brainspotting and the neuroexperiential model comes in.
Subscribe for more insights from the experts at Harley Therapy, and don't miss our next video.